Most people love animals, yet in our love for them, we almost always exert some kind of control over them. We own them, we ride them, we raise them, some people even eat them.
And we keep them in zoos, where we gawk at them and sometimes use them to teach kids about animals. And that's the question. Should we be doing that? This is the San Francisco Zoo. It's a typical mid-sized zoo for a town of just under 1 million people. At closing time on Christmas 2007, 3 young visitors were attacked here by a 4-year-old Siberian tiger named Tatiana. 1 was killed and 2 were injured. San Francisco police had to kill the tiger. Tatiana was in what's called a second-generation exhibit. That means it's an outdoor enclosure separated from the public by a moat. This is the most common type of large animal zoo exhibit in America. It supplemented the cat's first-generation exhibit, the kind of lion house you might find in a Curious George story, concrete boxes surrounded by steel bars. Tatiana was a young, energetic tiger. A couple of years earlier, she had mauled a zookeeper through the bars of the lion house cage. But what had caused her to attack these 3 teenagers? No cameras or witnesses were present, but Lori Gage, the Department of Agriculture lion expert, suspected that the young men had been throwing sticks and pine cones at Tatiana. Pine cones were later found at the moat, and zoo moats are cleaned regularly. Dr. Gage wrote in her report, "With my knowledge of tiger behavior, I cannot imagine a tiger trying to jump out of its enclosure unless it was provoked." In any event, Tatiana jumped into the moat and climbed out, leaving claw marks on the edge of the moat. She killed one of the youths and tracked down the other 2, mauling one before the police finally shot her. And the only unusual thing about this story is that Tatiana escaped. Visitor harassment of zoo animals is so common that we've learned to expect it when we visit zoos and aquariums. People tap on the glass, shake the cage, yell and scream at the animals. This behavior implies that zoos are not universally places where animals are respected. That begs the question, should we have zoos at all? And specifically, should zoos be considered places of education, where we protect and conserve the environment by exposing the public to wild animals in non-wild settings? Let's rewind a little to the Enlightenment era. World exploration was exploding. Europeans became increasingly aware of exotic wildlife from around the globe. Still, in the drama of creation, animals were considered more scenery than dramatis personae. Descartes described animals as nature's automata, and Western religious tradition held that animals were subject to humans. And even 19th century naturalists collected specimens, not beings with rights. Shockingly, but not surprisingly, zoos of this era even deemed it appropriate to include caged humans in their collections. But modern and postmodern philosophers gradually changed their views. In the 1830s, an English philosopher named Jeremy Bentham founded utilitarianism, which many modern animal rights activists cite as the genesis of their movement. Bentham famously said, "The question is not can they talk or can they reason, but can they suffer?" And a lot of 20th century animal rights activists use that slogan to this day, or at least the can they suffer part. Bentham, however, was not writing about animals, but enslaved Africans who could certainly talk, reason, and suffer. In the 1830s, this was considered a fringe opinion. So let's jump forward to the 20th century, where we find Bentham's philosophical descendant, the Australian Peter Singer. During protests against factory farming and animal experimentation, the term speciesism had come into vogue. It means giving preference to our own human species over another, and Singer speaks out explicitly against it. "All the arguments to prove man's superiority cannot shatter this hard fact. In suffering, the animals are our equals." This view opens up a can of worms. The utilitarian philosophers like Peter Singer distinguish between types of natural rights. We have basic rights, like to stay alive and be free, and trivial rights, like to eat meat when non-meat options are available, or to look at animals in a zoo. Basic rights outweigh trivial rights, so if animals have equal rights to humans, then we cannot morally eat them or put them in a zoo unless those activities become basic rights. So, for example, if there were no non-meat food available, then eating animals would qualify as a basic right. But what about zoos? Would putting animals in a zoo ever constitute a basic right? And there's one more problem with the utilitarian rights view of animals. Animal ethicists speak as proxies for the animals themselves. They ask, what does a wild animal want? Many humans think they know the answer to that. Wild animals want to stay wild, right? It sure seems that way. In 2010, a mountain lion was trapped and collared near Pine Ridge, South Dakota, just north of the Nebraska state line. Over a little more than a year, that cat traveled 1,800 miles, turning east at Duluth and heading into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you were to draw a conservative shape over just this path, you would conclude that this single mountain lion's range covers 180,000 square miles, about 6% of the total land area of the contiguous United States. And this half acre is the cougar habitat at the Como Park Zoo in St. Paul. It is hard to imagine that a cougar's quality of life will be the same in that setting, right? Or is it? A wild cougar lives 8 to 10 years on average. In a zoo, freed of threats from hunters and starvation, cougars live around 20 years. If we accept the utilitarian standard that we should keep animals free from suffering, then it's not easy to say that a well-run, enriched zoo exhibit fails to meet that standard. In short, it's impossible to know what an individual wild animal would want. And if we did know what animals want, we might be faced with the absurdity that many wild animals would choose captivity if given the chance. If we support fully equal animal rights, as Peter Singer would have us do, then we would, ironically, have to create more zoos. So we fall back on a moderate view. Humans keep some animals captive. We prefer rescued or captive-bred specimens that wouldn't survive in the wild. Maybe we choose to spare the largest and smartest animals captivity, except in rare circumstances, and we try to minimize suffering. This view is speciesist, but we struggle to ensure that it's not barbaric. So we will presume that zoos can be made humane for at least some large mammals. Here's a thornier question. Do zoos educate people well? Or do they teach us that animals are ours to do with as we please? At the zoo, humans have two types of affective experiences: situational interest and individual interest. Your situational interest is triggered in the moment by external stimuli. You might, for example, get excited about watching a tiger trying to attack this young man. That's situational. Individual interest is deeper. What have you learned about tigers? Will you continue to engage with the topic of tigers when you get home? Look them up on Wikipedia? Join a tiger protection group? Niels Dohn wrote that what turns situational interest into individual interest is time and depth of experience. Deeper, more connected experiences over a longer period of time lead to sustained, lifelong individual interest. So we as educators need to engineer deep, authentic human-animal experiences. This is University of Colorado researcher Louise Chawla. She says that when children increase their robust, authentic time in nature,
children are healthy, they sleep better. Older children are more likely to say that they feel a sense of subjective well-being.
So, according to Dohn and Chawla, we need to get our students outside more, ideally in the wilderness, to have robust human-animal experiences. We should try to get them birdwatching or backpacking or tending livestock or volunteering in wildlife rehabilitation. Our goal for students, especially urban kids, is robust human-animal experiences. Let's do a little thought experiment. Let's suppose that there are two axes of the human-animal experience, safety and robustness. Safety, of course, means not just physical safety, but how personally safe one feels. That is to say, how comfortable you are in the human-animal setting. Robustness is a holistic view of how immersive, exciting, and educational a human-animal experience is. These aren't measurable outcomes, of course. Remember, this is just a thought experiment. Let me put these two on a graph and chart a few human-animal experiences. In this illustration, the horizontal axis represents safety. An activity that's farther over to the right feels safer to the participants. Activities to the left of the center feel unsafe to the participants. The vertical axis represents robustness, how immersive, exciting, and educational the human-animal experience is. So let's plot some actual activities on our thought experiment chart. Here's one. Bird watching or birding. It's a pretty safe activity and not too personally challenging, so we'll put the safety bubble over here. And you get a close connection with animals, although maybe a closer connection to your binoculars in your guidebook. So robustness will score high, but not quite at the top. Now that we've got our framework established, let's put up a few more activities. Here's birding. Now this is where walking your own dog might fall. It's pretty safe, but doesn't give one too close a connection with wild nature. Moderate safety, low robustness. For comparison, let's add some more extreme activities here. This is where a photo safari for grizzly bears might rate. Animal connection is very high, but your sense of safety is pretty low. Let's chart wilderness backpacking, a fairly safe activity with a good level of connection with nature. Let's put up one last activity that's especially accessible for children, bug hunting. It feels very safe and kids get to connect with backyard nature. Okay, we're finally at the zoo visit. We'll move it way over to the right to show that zoo visits generally feel very safe to the participants. The robustness of a visit to the zoo is variable. According to studies, though, most zoo visitors use the day for recreation and not education. So we're going to chart robustness about here. Does that look right? Of course, I've been tricking you. I have made all these qualitative judgments about safety and robustness looking through the lens of my own upbringing and experience. I was brought up to feel that to get a little dirty was great. But to people from some communities, dirt can mean disease or time and money spent washing more clothes or a lack of respect for the human body. A little dirt is not good for everyone. Bugs can be bad, too. People feel they're dangerous and carry disease, and they can bite and cause discomfort. Outdoor adventure can feel unsafe to many women and members of underrepresented ethnic groups who are made to feel unwelcome in wildlands, or worse. It's especially important to realize that in the United States, our park system was founded explicitly as a segregated institution. Our society consists of dozens of intersecting communities, and it's no wonder that many of them do not feel as safe in the outdoors as the overrepresented majority. So let's revisit this chart. I created it through my own lens. Birding and backpacking feel pretty safe to me. But what if I were to instead apply the lens of somebody raised where insects and rodents spoiled your food supply, someone made to feel unwelcome in the great outdoors? Deborah Simmons is a researcher who showed urban children pictures of nature to determine their sense of safety there. She wrote that, quote, the children expressed a great deal of fear and concern directly related to the nature depicted in the scenes. So let's add a safety penalty to some of these activities. And that's not all. Many of the human-animal interface activities I've described require a lot of time, expensive equipment, or special training. I'm going to shrink the bubbles to represent each activity's relative ease or accessibility. Suddenly, the value of a zoo visit stands out. It feels safe. It is accessible to people from all communities, of all ages, of every ability. Zoos are the great democratizers in nature education. Those who feel that zoos are immoral, unethical, and poor teachers are at least partly right. Certainly, zoos have problems, and we have to continually revisit the moral basis for keeping wild animals in captivity. But a zoo is an essential link between communities that have no access to nature and the environment. Our goal is to bring the robustness of zoo education programs up while, of course, continuing to address animal welfare and ethics.
So our moral obligation is to make zoos beacons of both animal welfare and educational equity. Otherwise, we'll be reserving human-animal relationships and their accompanying benefits for the overrepresented majority who have the money and freedom to access those non-urban settings. Thanks for listening.